Did you hear that? It said
I
report.
did, yeah.
Okay. Well, good morning. I'm sure it's probably nighttime where you are.
Yeah,
I'm
it's about 4 in the afternoon here.
okay. Yeah, it's like 8 a.m. here, so early, and I am not as much of a morning person as I used to be, but yeah, I thought it'd be good to have a bit of a chat. I might do a little bit of an introduction before this and just be like, this is Thinkwert. He's a great Twitter poster. Here's some of his
Sure.
highlights or something like that. But I'll send it to you first and let me know if you don't like that sort of lead in. Um, yeah, so yeah, it was nice to meet you. I just started talking to you a couple minutes ago. I was
Yeah.
talking to you about some of the stuff I like, and you were talking about some of the stuff you like. Namely, Lord of the Rings came up, and thought it'd be a good idea to just hit record before we talk about it. Um,
Yeah, we're starting to jump into Lord of the Rings, yeah.
yeah, I write a little bit. I'm not like I almost don't call myself a writer because I've never finished anything, so I just feel like I have that sort of like wannabe writer title. But I do actually write a bit of stories. I have this sort of like I jump from book to book sort of thing. But I've been writing one that's like a fantasy sort of Lord of the
Mhm.
Rings inspired thing, um, and Wheel of Time as well. And the idea of Tom Bombadil, though, for whatever reason, I just love this conception of this guy who's like, I want to say bigger than life, but he's not even because he's like smaller than life in some sense. But he's a character in Lord of the Rings that is basically so powerful or so old that he's like got this mythical status. And I think there's a part in it where he like picks up the ring and just like doesn't even give a shit about it and just sort of
Right, right. It doesn't affect him. He's kind of almost a meta character outside of the world of the Middle Earth and
Mm,
doesn't affect him at all. Um, yeah, so famously, he's a very divisive character in Lord of the Rings. And if you've seen the Peter Jackson trilogy, he doesn't show up, right? He's not a factor at all. He's not mentioned. He's not a factor at all. And so there's a lot of people who are, back when it was first movies came out, were upset. He's so important to it, and people are like, we don't really need him. We don't really care about him. So um, I get why Peter Jackson made that choice, but
yeah.
he really feels like the most Tolkienish character in the Lord of the Rings, right? Only Tolkien would have put this character in there. He's actually, have you read about Tom Bombadil and done background on him?
I've watched a few videos and I've read like
Uh-huh.
lore and like some like theories about who he is and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
some of
He,
it
he
gets
was based
very
on a doll they had in their
oh,
household, a Tolkien household. They had a little doll called Tom Bombadil. He had written some stories about Tom Bombadil for his own family, kind of like stories just for them. And so it was almost like this family reference that he throws in there. And you just get the sense that Tolkien has a huge affection for this character. He just loves this character so much. But he is this kind of meta character. He doesn't really fit seamlessly into the world of Middle Earth in the way that the elves and Sauron and all that does.
mm,
Um, so I'm glad he exists. I kind of get why people get impatient with him because he does feel just like he's from a different universe
yeah.
in
Not
there.
even like a side quest, just like a tacked on random aspect that doesn't really
Yeah, yeah, that he's kind of thrown in there. I also think part of it is that Tolkien doesn't, he kind of knows where he's going to end up, but not quite yet. And
mm,
so as he's writing, going through the first part of this novel, he's putting in these things and they're kind of experimentations and cul-de-sacs that when he finally gets a little further on, he kind of knows where it's going to go, and he finally finishes there. But it's part of this experimentation, almost like an early draft stuff that kind of
mm.
stayed in. It's my impression. I don't have any knowledge, a special knowledge of it, but my speculation is that Tom Bombadil is kind of a first draft character that he just loved too much to get rid of, and he kept with him throughout the novels.
Yeah, I mean that it seems right. And being the sort of wannabe writer, I used to really be interested in like what is this writer's process and stuff like that. But I haven't actually I don't know much about Tolkien except that he took such a long time to write Lord of the Rings, which I think might have just been that he was like from what I gather, but I might have this wrong, he spent many years building out this world and all
Right.
the,
Yeah.
the language he wrote himself and all these sorts of things about the history without actually doing the aspect that was Lord of the Rings. And then, he did The Hobbit and Silmarillion.
Silmarillion. Yeah. Silmarillion. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but yeah, for me, like I love the character. One aspect of this part that I'm doing for one of my stories is like I've always been attracted to like that trickster mythology thing with like Loki or
Yeah.
having like these people, and I really just like the idea of having like just a class of people in it who are like basically like jesters for a king, but they're like for some reason really powerful and can like teleport and stuff like that. But I like Tom Bombadil in that aspect where it's just like it's almost like they want to have fun and fuck around rather than be like pivotal to it. And yeah, I really like that. Um, I've I've also been interested in just like for whatever reason, I've done stand-up comedy and I really enjoy that. And I just something about me that likes to fuck around. I know you're a
Mhm.
teacher. I don't know if you don't want me to say that, but
No, I've mentioned it on Twitter before. I'm an
oh,
English professor at a small Midwest college.
yeah, okay. It was always a thing that like at school I was maybe a bit of a pain in the ass because the idea
Yeah.
of like, learning rather than like just entertaining the other kids, it was very hard to like switch that off. Um, I also like once upon a time I got into like sort of like the DMT stuff and like that drug world and stuff like that. And there's this thing people would call like jesters that would pop up when some people strip, and they seem to just be like these weird creatures, which are probably just like your own brain manifesting them or whatever. But they're just like sort of like this like it's not like chaotic, but it's like it's not evil, but it's maybe like chaotic, this sort of energy of just like wanting to have fun, play around. And yeah, I for whatever reason I'm doing this one story and I have these people who like travel between universes, and instead of really being super pivotal to like, you know, in Tolkien's world, it's like fight
Mm.
evil versus good. They're more of just like I want to have fun and see how interesting I can make this world. And yeah, I've been sort of trying to
I'm
deep dive
um
a bit in Tom Bombadil.
I'm teaching this week Midsummer's Night Dream in my Shakespeare course I'm teaching, and the fairy creatures of Midsummer's Night Dream
I want
are
to
a
get
lot like that. So sort of they're kind of weird and scary, actually.
mm,
If you read through them, that they're so amoral and so powerful and so manipulative. Uh, and there's a I don't know how familiar you are with it, but there's a whole plot where the king and queen of the fairies have a battle over a slave boy and who
right.
has control of the slave boy. So there's almost this kind of sinister quality about them, and yet they're also really kind of this deeply attractive alienness about those characters. But it's just interesting because I think when we have stories about fairies and fairy magic in our 21st century, they tend to be kind of quote unquote good, or if they're
Mm,
powerful, you kind of you want them to be on your side. They're kind of friendly, and
yeah.
they're not necessarily sinister, but they're just so alien and more amoral that they're really scary, kind of scary in the same way a wild bear is scary, right? That
Yeah.
a wild bear is attractive, but also you're kind of weirded out by it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's always that thing as well where it's like a bear's not evil, but it will eat you. But like some
Yeah,
people might, harbor like if it kills their family, they'll harbor that resentment towards it. But it's a different sort of morality. Like it's a different relationship than say like a person who kills them, like a robber or something. And yeah, it's interesting. I haven't. I want to actually get back into Midsummer's Night's Dream. I don't remember any of it, but I remember I was in the play when I was a kid, and yeah,
oh
it's
yeah.
those memories of mine.
What role did you play? Do you remember?
I don't even. I was God. I must have been like 9 or 10 or something.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in like year 3 or year 4, and I just can't remember. Which now that I think about it, that seems kind of early for that play because if I remember, it's got some weird aspects to it. Yeah, I would like to start getting more into some Shakespeare because every time I've like read it or watched adaptations or anything like that, I just I love it. But there is that barrier sometimes because the writing is a little bit that old English. Is there some that you would like recommend obviously you teach it at a time, but is there
Yes.
certain like Shakespeare plays or writing?
Well, A Midsummer's Night Dream is the most produced of all the Shakespeare plays.
Oh, is it?
Uh, right, it's the most popular one,
I always thought
and
Romeo and Juliet for whatever reason.
Romeo and Juliet is up there. It's like the top three. But Midsummer's Night Dream tends to be a kind of a crowd pleaser, and that is up there. Much Ado About Nothing, I think, is pretty accessible
Okay,
as far as it being some for an audience to get into that hasn't had much previous exposure to Shakespeare. Um, Ones I would not recommend would be The Tempest and Hamlet because they tend to be kind of long or Hamlet is long, Tempest is convoluted. Uh, but yeah, I would say Much Ado and The Midsummer's Night Dream are probably the two most accessible to start out with. Romeo and Juliet is pretty accessible as well.
yeah, okay. I'm not sure how much of a movie buff you are, but I really liked it was called The King with Timothy Chalamet. I don't know.
Chalamet,
Yeah, have you seen that by any chance?
I
I
did,
love
and
it. You
it
didn't like
kind
it?
of annoyed me because it wasn't close enough to Shakespeare and it wasn't close enough to the actual history.
Well,
It
okay,
kind of straddled this middle lane where they try to do a little too much. They try to bring in a little Shakespeare, which they shouldn't have. They should have just done
something
the the
different.
the historical version, in my opinion. So I was a little annoyed by it, but I thought it was well done from what I saw.
Interesting. So I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but my dad's a hit. They call it SOS here, but it's basically history.
Okay.
He's not a professor like yourself. He's more high school years, but yeah,
Mhm.
he's done a lot of English teaching as well, and not just like substitute, but like he's been history and English throughout his career. And yeah, I've noticed for him, it's hard for him to really get into like a history thing because it's like a movie or something like that because there's just he can't get over the fact that like, oh, this isn't what happened. Like, but I couldn't imagine him enjoying like 300, for instance, because it's
Mhm.
in my memory, the movie 300 is not supposed to be historical. It's like based off of like a graphic novel on this,
Yeah,
but he just like he watches something like that and it's just like, that's
he
like
can't get
there's
past it.
even like a bit of magic in it, and he's just like,
Yeah.
do you have the same sort of thing with it or?
Yeah, somewhat. I I think I could tend to avoid enjoy movies on their own, but then, like I just said, the King annoyed me on a couple of notes there, and I wasn't able to
Yeah,
get
that's fair.
past it. There was a
Yeah,
movie that it actually my background made me enjoy it more. That came out last year. Was The Northman? Did you ever see The Northman?
I did. I did. I thought
And
that
that
was
is
do you like it more because in my memory it's not like, it's not something that necessarily happened, or maybe it was and I just completely forgot.
it's based on the legend of Amleth,
Oh, okay.
which is the source of Hamlet. So it's a different story than Hamlet, but Shakespeare took that legend and he kind of changed up a whole bunch of things. He added some elements like a ghost and other things. So
Mm,
what Northman does is takes the legend of Amleth, that was the source there, but it also embeds a lot of these references to Hamlet.
mm,
And because I'm so deeply versed in Hamlet and Amleth, the legend, it was a real delight for me because the creators of that movie knew it too. And
right.
so I've not met many people who are enthusiastic about it as I was. I think it's partly
Oh,
because
really?
I was so steeped in Hamlet and Amleth that I got the references I think that most people did not get
Yeah,
from that film.
okay.
So I think that was my favorite film of last year, actually, of
Oh,
2020 rather.
yeah, because
Because
it definitely a lot of people said it was like a great movie. So I
yeah,
thought it had like really high reviews and stuff, but I guess I'm not actually as versed in like what everyone thinks about things, but I've just like I consume a lot of movies and stuff and
yeah.
books. I just love it. I don't know. There's definitely
Now
some that Hmm?
speaking of, you said you saw Godzilla minus one.
I did. I'm glad that you recommended it because I probably wouldn't have like gone, and I would have definitely seen it at some point, but I probably wouldn't have gone and like watched it in the movies right now if I hadn't like if you hadn't recommended it. And yeah, I did. I
Mhm.
definitely liked it. It was really good. It was, you know, I've watched some of the other Godzillas, and it's hard to not make them a little bit over the top, I think, because it's just, Godzilla fighting King Kong under Earth or
Right.
whatever it is. But, definitely aspects of it where it's like Godzilla in this movie is basically can destroy like a whole city in like 2 seconds. But I thought it was really well done. You really actually delve into like the character and you're cheering for him, you like him. There's multifaceted aspects of it where he's actually like a very interesting person and you know I don't want to like spoil too much, but he like, at the very beginning you find out he was supposed to be a suicide bomber and like obviously there's that whole Japan culture of honor and he
Of
people
honor
like
and duty. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I liked it. Kind of almost happy ending even at the end, which I hate to
Yeah.
admit it. I am a bit of like a holy like, it's co-opted my mind where I do like a happy ending. I like seeing Frodo at
Uh-huh.
the end, hanging out with Sam and stuff like that. Um, yeah, I liked it. Do you it seems like you might have liked it even more because I think you said that might have been your favorite movie.
I think it might be my favorite of last year. A lot of the films that were really on the top of critics lists and things like that really didn't do it for me. I didn't much care for Killers of the Flower Moon.
I haven't seen
Uh,
it yet.
I
Heard it
Oppenheimer
was
didn't do
bad.
much for me. Barbie didn't do much for me, but Godzilla minus one did. I was really interested in the way it treated the Godzilla uh, figure as kind of like the Jaw shark, right? Not that it had a personality or even motive
Mm,
besides eat or destroy, right? It's just kind of this thing. And what's interesting about Godzilla, the minus one, is how the characters react to it. And you have to have all these civilians get together, and it's almost like the Dunkirk
yeah.
boats gathering. All the civilians have to get together in order to defeat the Godzilla creature. Um, yeah, not to spoil it, but I kind of wish the ending wasn't quite so happy. There's a lot of little happy coincidences that happen at the end. But then again, the audience I was with, they loved it, of course.
Yeah,
So
of course.
I won't begrudge it too much. But yeah, I think it was probably my favorite film that I saw last year.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't mind like this. Oh, you didn't see her die, so she comes back at the end, sort of thing. I'm like, yeah,
Uh-huh.
happy, whatever. Um, yeah, I thought it was a great movie. I love Japanese culture for whatever reason as well. Like, it's just I don't know. I was so steeped in like samurai stuff as a kid and manga and
Yeah.
anime that yeah, it's
Yeah,
definitely.
of all the world cinema, I think Japanese is my favorite.
Oh yeah.
Kurosawa
Do
and
you have some
Ozu.
some sort of couple notable movies you like or anything like
Of the
that?
Japanese world,
Yeah.
there's oh, I can't remember who's directed it, but Toshida Mifune stars in it. It's called Samurai Rebellion, and it's about a samurai who's caught against a code of honor. Right, he needs to kind of struggle against doing his duty to his lord and doing the right thing. The Seventh Samurai is, of course, the great classic.
Yeah.
Rashomon by Kurosawa is the great classic. Frankly, you work through the best of Kurosawa, and you've got the best of Japanese cinema. Tokyo Story from Ozu, Sancho the Bailiff is another great one. Um, but yeah, I think if I had to work through the best 10 of French cinema or Japanese cinema or Italian cinema, I pick Japanese.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's something I like the sense of duty and honor that pervades the Japanese concern
Yeah.
in their cinema. And
Definitely
that's portrayed.
it feels like a different world a little bit. Like you see how sometimes it's like this like kind of just destroys them. This sense of honor is like more intense than anything. Like just even the whole idea of like stabbing yourself and
Right,
committing
seppuku, yeah,
yeah, because you dishonored your lord or whatever. Like it's as like a sort of like rationalist, maybe a little bit of like the idea of war as a kid was like, oh, that's cool and fun. But then as I got older, I'm like, I don't know if I really want to die over some shit that doesn't really, you know,
pertain, yeah,
directly affect me in a way that's like makes sense to die for. But yeah, like it's sometimes I watch Japanese stuff and you just see it so hard where it's like that's the predominant thing. Like they care more about honor than they care about anything. And it's kind of interesting, especially like Australia is it's very similar to America. Like a lot of people who come to Australia, they're like, oh, it just feels like America. Like everyone, is very predominantly like white people who have
Mhm.
the same sort of Christian Western background and that sort of thing. So it's very similar. But I think yeah, like American and Australia and England stuff, like there's this whole Christian arc of like that's what we believe, but I don't know if that thing is so strong as it is in Japan, where it's like not it's almost religious over there because they love it so much. But yeah, it's just different. Like people be dishonorable here or whatever, and like take money and stuff, and they won't seppuku themselves. But I don't know. It's interesting. I definitely find it like interesting. Have you seen the movie Silence by any chance? It's like Martin Scorsese
I
and
have, yeah, yeah. That was intense movie. It's a movie I'm glad to watch, but I don't know if I ever want to watch again, if
oh
that
okay,
makes sense.
yeah, I love the I don't know
It is
why.
hard. It's a hard watch. But
Very
yeah, that's at the kind of core of it, right? It's that uh pragmatism versus honor
mm,
and denial of faith and what at what point can you dissemble and what point do you not dissemble. It's been a few years since I've seen it, but yeah, it made a great impression. I like that movie much better than Killers of the Flower Moon.
yeah, okay, yeah. I still haven't seen it, but I've heard people say it wasn't that great. Um, I think that's the thing with movies though, they're so subjective. Like some people love some things and some people hate it. I love the Green Knight, even though it's like kind of weird and stupid. I don't know if you saw that, but a lot of
I
people
did, yeah.
find it they're like it's so
There's
dumb.
there's individual scenes of that movie that I thought were so great. It didn't really gel for me as a totality, but I get why people love it. There's so many things in that movie that are interesting, and you think about them for a
Mm,
long time afterwards.
interesting. So you're an English teacher. Do you write yourself or do you have aspirations to write or anything?
Outside of Twitter, not really, not really. Um,
Which
a
to
few
be
years
fair,
back,
you definitely have a
sorry,
Twitter. Which I was just gonna say, to be fair, you definitely have a Twitter where like I'm definitely sometimes like almost envious. Like you write these things that are just they like invoke some sort of like mythological, I don't know, something in my mind. Some of the things you've done, I'm like surprised that you can keep coming out with these like just very interesting tweets and like I don't know, you have some that it's like I don't know if they're AI generated or what, but you're like talking almost like a mockumentary of like this is like a fake creature that exists and it's almost like
yeah, yeah,
Dr. Seuss mythological aspect to some of them that yeah, I don't know. I love your tweets. I think
yeah.
you're really good at it. Definitely.
I'll sometimes use AI generated images. I don't use AI to write tweets or anything like that.
Sure, sure, sure.
Um, but yeah, I had a Midjourney account that I let expire, so
Um,
I don't use AI generated images that much anymore.
mm,
But yeah, a few years back, I was doing a lot of Twitter games where I would have these interlocking tweets. You make a choice, click on this quote tweet or this quote tweet, and your character would make a choice. And so,
like a choose your own
uh,
adventure story.
kind of a choose your own adventure
Uh,
with tweets. Yeah. If you do a search of Thinkwert on Substack, Thinkwert Substack, you'll have a link to all those games. I pretty much put all of them up there.
okay.
But with the changes to Twitter, they don't work quite as well as they used to. So I've kind of put them on hold. I'm not sure if and when I'll ever get back to them. But that's about as close as I've gotten to creative writing, really on a long scale, is those kind of choose your own adventure linked Twitter threads. But the biggest one was over 1,000 tweets that were linked, uh, and
That's pretty
people go
cool.
through them. Yeah, there's one like you become the emperor of the Rome, and so you start out as a kind of a lowly um, young man trying to work his way up. The curses honor him,
Oh
and
yeah.
finally become the emperor. And then what do you do once you're emperor? And making choices on that. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's pretty cool. I definitely think I've seen some of these like tools where people they're basically just like GPT wrappers, but I saw one where it's the images generate as a story generates, and it is kind of that like choose your own adventure story, but
Mm.
it's AI generated, and you just kind of like nudge it into that direction. I definitely think those things are probably going to become just very addictive and fun, or at least if I was a kid and I had those tools, I could see myself sinking hundreds, thousands
Yeah.
of hours into them. Especially some of them have like ambient music behind it, and like they read out the story to you and stuff like that. Yeah. I can see a world where like I don't know if Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse is gonna take off, but I could see a
Right.
world where like just these things are becoming so addicting and fun. Like most people I know, they're just chained to their phone, and it might be TikTok or whatever, but I'm a little bit almost reluctant to like delve so deep in, and like obviously like Twitter's really fun. It's a tool that I like a lot and I use it a lot. And I definitely think it's got like a level of it's more about ideas than some of these other social media platforms. But I don't know. Sometimes I'm pretty ADHD, and I grew up with like a lot of like cognitive like issues with just like being able to like retain attention. When I was about like 18 to 22, I lived with my mum out in what we call the bush in Australia, but it's
Mhm.
basically just country. And I didn't have the internet. I didn't have anything. I was so bored all the time, but it was such a important pivotal point of my life, and I really like sort of like reclaimed my attention and like was reading books and just doing things that I found rewarding that weren't just like passively consuming media. But I could see these, like if I had a kid, I could see them just being so hooked into something, whether that's like Elon Musk's Neuralink or like just their phone, that sometimes I get a little bit like, I don't know how good it is. Like it's inevitable and that's the way the world's going. But yeah, I don't know. That's a bit of I just tangent. I just,
I was reading someone saying that in the modern world, you never have to be bored, right? You never have to be bored, right? With wherever you go with your phone, you don't have to be bored. But what if being bored is important? What if
it seems
being
like it
bored
is.
is essential?
Mm,
Uh, in the same way that we never have to walk anywhere. But what if exercise is actually kind of something we need? Uh, or if, our body needs resistances to diseases. So it's so good that we get some diseases sometimes. Not that right now I want that.
yeah.
Getting over my cold. But what if boredom is something that's essential to, I don't know if you want to call it character or intelligence or progress? And that if we have a life that there is no boredom, it's all stimulation all the time from our magical rectangles, that we are losing something that we may not even realize, but we're losing.
Mm.
Same way that a society that doesn't exercise has obesity epidemics. What that would be, I don't know. But it is something I think about.
Yeah, it's definitely I'm such a bad programmer. Like I'm really crap at it, but I'm trying to build stuff out and get more skills in that avenue. And some of these new AI tools, they make it very easy where you can sort of get like a minimum viable product up, but you just kind of don't know how you did it. And that's kind of where I'm at. But I've had this idea for a while of like basically just like a TikTok or a Twitter or whatever, or a Tinder, like something that you use and you scroll. But over time, instead of just sort of prioritizing like time watching ads or just time on the platform, it sort of nudges you into sort of like a gamified project management tool where it's just like pushing you to do projects that you care about just based on your own subjective interests. So it just sort of like slowly surveys what things you like doing and being like, oh, here's a template for like how you could do a whatever it is. Like if you're obsessed with TikTok, here's how some dance things you could do or like how to do a collection. And yeah, I've been thinking about this idea for a while, and I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of room in the space of like these addictive tools that could actually be used to just make people more useful or better or more happy based on their own sort of
Mhm.
the things that they actually care about, but they're not able to get to. Because I know as a kid, me and my brother, we got computers, and then our brain, we just so addicted to computer games when we were young. And but I could see a way where like you use Twitter or something and it like handholds you to it, where you are slowly becoming a creator and stuff like that yourself. And I actually think it would be more addictive as well because like most people on the internet, they're just consuming stuff and they find that so entertaining that they do it, 8, 9 hours a day. But actually, if you create stuff, it's like it's so much more enjoyable and exciting, and like actually watching the likes and the tweet, like the reshares and all that. It's much more of an enjoyable experience. Plus, you're actually doing something rather than just like consuming media. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah. So I asked my dad because my dad is a bit of an English teacher as well. And I just asked like what's something that he would ask like if he was going to speak with somebody that's like an English teacher. He didn't give me much, but he just said that what's the most challenging bit of your job for you? And I was curious if you had something like that that you could po-
Um, Probably the most unpleasant is grading essays.
mm,
Um, and of course, with the changes in Chat GPT and AI generation, it's made it much more difficult. And the whole idea. So I teach literature classes and I teach composition classes, and I don't think it affects the literature that much, the literature side of that much. But having students do writing outside of class and then evaluating it and trying to see, did the student actually write this? Right now, I think I'm there's an arms race. And I'm kind of have an edge on students, but I'm not so arrogant as to think that I'm always going to have the edge, or
mm,
maybe I even lost it. Um, that I think there's going to have to be a change in how we do composition and writing outside of the class, that we might have to bring writing back into the class.
right. Like
Maybe I have students
handwriting.
writing by hand in
Yeah.
class. I've had to do a few I've assignments that I did online for years. I now have students sit down and write in class, and then
Mm,
I'll evaluate their handwriting and their writing, and then um, have to struggle through the bad handwriting, right?
mm.
Uh, but
Yeah, that seems hard.
that right now I think is my biggest challenge. How to evaluate student writing outside of class when AI just changes that game.
Yeah.
And that's probably where I'm at now.
Nice. I will admit that I definitely like I'm a bit concerned that it might be just my dad and his school, but him and his teacher friends, they're so like it's like anti-AI. Like they don't even conceive of like the possibility of like why it would even be a good thing for anybody. And they're just at this level of like AI is bad. All it is like it's a cheating framework for students, and there's no possible
Right.
way that there could be like a net positive to society or anything. Like they can't conceive of it. And I'm not sure if this is true. Maybe I'm psychoanalyzing him from my own childhood, but I know like growing up there was like just this obsession with originality, which you can sort of understand like as a teacher that's what you're trying to sort of bring out of your students, and everything sort of has to be it's got to be at least be your own words. But sometimes I wonder if that obsession is kind of getting in the way of things, because I know that like there's one blog I really like. I don't know if you've ever heard it. It's called Brain Pickings, and I think they've been changed to
Yes.
Marginalia. And I remember just explaining to my dad, I'm like, yeah, she just reads a lot of, great literature and then just like writes about it. And he's like, oh, so she's like stealing it. And I'm like, it's not really like stealing. It's she's not trying like, hey, this is my work. She's just saying like, look at this beautiful passage. This sort of echoes the same sentiments of this thing. But I remember he couldn't like get past that bit of like, yeah, but it's not her writing all of it. And yeah, I wonder if like some of the school is just going to be so negative towards these new technologies that they just kind of push kids even further away from enjoying learning. Because I know there's a lot of people who super good students, but then after they graduated, they never wanted to touch a book again because they just have this like linkage of like dredge work with learning or whatever. Whereas I was kind of the opposite. I was an absolutely shit student, really bad. I was like nice to the teachers and stuff like that, but I just didn't. I couldn't conceive of why it was important to learn. Like it seemed like no one told me like, oh, this is a good thing. They were just like, this will get you a good job, and I'm like, I don't know about that. But then after school, I fell in love with reading, and I was like, oh, learning is like amazing, and I really enjoyed it. But yeah, sometimes I wonder if teachers are going to like just go so far the other way where, you know, AI and stuff like that, it's really fun if you actually use it. It might not be the best way to actually engage your mind, but I think maybe going completely against it is going to like push people even further away. But maybe,
The way I see it is that AI is going to permeate everything, for better or for worse. Whatever you think of it, you're not going to be able to
get away.
make a clean bubble where there's no AI infiltration, right? You're going to have to deal with it. I'm 47, so I'm an old man, and I remember growing up. without a calculator in my math classes, and teachers being very skeptical and hostile, really, to calculators, right?
Mm.
You gotta be able to figure these things out in your head. And then nowadays, of course, the kids have powerful calculators in their pockets, right?
Yeah.
You use calculators in math class. So there's I don't know what the end synthesis is going to look like, but I do know there's going to be a synthesis of some kind where
Mm.
AI is going to be part of the classroom and part of the education. It's going to be inevitable. Um, Whether that's going to be a good thing or bad thing, or what that will look like, I don't know. All I know is it's going to happen.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I just think running away from it is not dealing with the issue. My dad's school, they do a lot of everything's like by hand now because yeah, they're trying to make it so that students can't cheat, which it makes sense. But yeah. Um, Also curious, what is the best thing about your job to you, if you had to pick one?
Um, I like interacting with students. I also like there's a scale of how well do you know something, where
Mm,
you hear someone say it, then you kind of goes up to doing a little bit of it, and the highest scale of how do you actually know the subject is teaching it to somebody else, right? That's where you have a true mastery of a subject. And so you get to know literature a lot better when you're forced to teach it, because then you not only have to reach a understanding that's satisfactory to you, you have to be able to explain to somebody else. And someone
mm,
asks a question, you're like, oh, well, do I really understand this as well as I thought I did? And I have to go back and dig and have a conversation with the student. Um, so, I jumped really deep into Shakespeare when I first taught this course last year. And would I have ever done that if I wasn't teaching the class? Probably not. I'll be honest. I would not probably have done that. But having to teach it, I got to read Shakespeare, and having read so deeply to Shakespeare, then I really got understanding that I don't think I would have had otherwise without it. So that's one aspect of teaching that I really
mm.
like, is that enforced discipline of having to really dig deep into a subject and know it deeply.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. I There's this guy Tiago Forte who's he's like a productivity guy, but he talks about like his process for taking notes or whatever. It's like he takes notes, then he sort of highlights the important notes that he took. So he goes through like a second time, and then I think the third time is he like distills that into something else. So he's creating a blog post or something like that. But then I think the fourth bit of it is like he's like, this is the most important bit for me, is actually teaching it to somebody else. It's like
Mhm.
that's what I really sort of ingrain it. My dad said something similar. I asked him, I'm like, okay, what is it for you? And he said that when he sees young people making connections with the world by literature and actually being moved by it, it's like that's something that he really likes. And he said that happens the most with Shakespeare. So yeah, it's uh, I'm not sure if you've ever delved into this stuff, but I saw lately there's a bit of like a like insurgence of like people thinking Shakespeare didn't write everything he wrote.
Shakespeare wasn't Shakespeare. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Is
yeah.
that How do you feel about that? Is he a fraud? Is
Um, I think Shakespeare was Shakespeare.
mm,
And I'll talk about it a little bit more. Um, Regardless of what you think, there was a singular literary genius at the end of the 1500s, beginning of the 1600s, that produced these fantastic plays. So it wasn't a team of guys, it wasn't a consortium, although Shakespeare co-wrote a lot, but that real genius, there's like 13 years between 1595 and 1608 that we have kind of the bulk of those brilliant works, kind of writing 2 plays a year. He writes more plays than anybody else we know of at that time in that Renaissance era. He's just incredibly prolific. There is a genius there. So why do I think Shakespeare was Shakespeare? Well, nobody doubted it until the 1800s. And the reason they doubted it was because they thought that he was a country boy and from Stratford upon Avon. And so he couldn't have possibly had the education to write the way he did. Well, he was an autodidact, right? He read a lot. He just read a lot. He knew things that other people didn't know. He has little countryisms in his plays. So the actual vocabulary and grammar that he uses is kind of old fashioned. You compare it to the playwrights of his era who went to Oxford, who were city guys. They wrote in a different vernacular than Shakespeare did. The guy who wrote the Shakespeare plays was a country boy. And we
Mm,
know it because it's embedded in the vocabulary, in the grammar that he uses. The Shakespeare loved to write about family. Every play he wrote has some element of family embedded in it, except for Pericles, which he co-wrote with somebody else. So there's this concern. This is a different concern than a nobleman, who's usually who they say, right? It was actually secretly a nobleman who paid this actor Shakespeare to take credit for it. But the other thing is that Shakespeare never wrote plays about London. He never wrote a play that was set in London. All of his plays were set in fantasy worlds or kind of overseas, somewhere in Verona, Venice, um, or some other place, but not London.
mm,
Why? Because he didn't grow up in London. He wasn't a London guy. That was not where his heart was. And so when you read these arguments for Shakespeare not being Shakespeare, there's a lot of motivated reasoning, right? If we assume that Shakespeare was not Shakespeare, what kind of secret clues could be embedded in the text that would tell us he's not really Shakespeare? He was some nobleman who took the name. But they always seem like exercises in overreading to me, right? You're
mm.
pulling things from a fictional story and assuming biographical information from them. So, I mean, is it impossible? I guess not, but I don't see good evidence to think that Shakespeare was not Shakespeare. And we know he has friends like Ben Jonson who writes about him and would go out drinking with him and talk about him. And Ben Jonson would write about the reading he did of Shakespeare. So he would have had to have fooled Ben Jonson, the other great playwright of his era, so thoroughly that he would have no idea.
Mm.
But the people who actually knew him didn't seem to think that he wasn't him. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, definitely.
So I just do not really see much credence in it. I guess I wouldn't say 100%, but I'm like 95% sure Shakespeare was Shakespeare because I don't see any good reason to believe that he wasn't who he was or his contemporaries said he was.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing that people they really obsess over that sort of legitimacy of it, and yeah, I find it interesting, but this is probably I hope it doesn't sound almost dismissive, but I think my brain is a little bit weird where it might be a negative thing, but I almost part of me almost doesn't care. Like if he did just get this consortium of people and like got them to
Sure.
write for him, I'm like, oh well, look what he could do as like a manager or like a contracting person. And that yeah, that might not be the best view, but like I know like for instance, like with music, some people really dislike some people who just like take um clips from other people and make this great song. But for me, I'm really interested in like great art, so I almost don't
Yeah.
care like how
Yeah.
original it was as long as it
It's
me.
like yeah, you may have a great artist who was a horrible person, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you should be able to be
That's
appreciated,
right.
even if Shakespeare wasn't Shakespeare, even if John Lennon beat his wife, right? You can still like the Beatles.
Mm.
So I think there needs to be or should be some kind of separation of the art and the artist.
Yeah, I know my mom's very she's you know she we
What's
grew
your
up
cat's name?
we you see my cat Boo, yeah, he's a
Boo.
little kitten. So it's spelled B-U-U, but it's just Boo. He is a kitten, and he always kind of tries to make an appearance. But yeah, he's very cute thing in my opinion.
Yeah.
Me and my girlfriend, we probably have too many animals. We have two dogs and two cats. I met my girlfriend at a dog park, and so our dogs
Okay.
were in love, and she already had a cat, and I don't know. I just felt bad that the cat didn't have like a friend. And now I'm thinking we have way too many animals, but yeah, I don't know. He's very
I saw a young lady walk by the past a few minutes ago. I assume that
yeah,
was her.
that's my girlfriend.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I think what I was gonna say is like my mom, we grew up in she grew up in Kentucky and I lived there for a bit, and she's got very I don't know the best way to say it, but just like redneck kind of bad parents. I loved my grandma, but she was probably not a great person, and I never heard the N word until she said it, and she, you know, she's
Uh,
just old lady and super nice to me, and then she's like saying things like that. And in Kentucky, I grew up in, they had a thing where like certain districts would try to send students to different schools, and then those schools would try to vice versa. And so I went to a school that was like primarily like African American kids, so it was like 90% black and Mexican, and then a little bit white. So for me, I was like, I didn't even know racism was a thing. Like it just completely surprised me. But yeah, her mom was not a great person, and so my mom's gone the route. Sorry, boo. He's always tries to steal on the laptop. My mom's gone the route of like she's like social worker and all like really deeply cares about helping people. And so for her, if she, you know, she finds out that a actor was abusive or anything like that, she will not watch the movie ever. She can't even enjoy like her brain of like, oh, I like this movie, but that actor was kind of like a piece of shit or whatever. She's just like, I don't like that movie anymore. And for me, that just seems that's so absolute. Like I can't imagine just not enjoying something just because the person was bad. And yeah, I don't. For me, I definitely separate them. It's hard for me not to.
there's terms from the rational sphere called low coupling, low decoupling, high decoupling. You heard this?
I have
So
not.
how decoupling, as in how you can separate things out, like the biography from the work. So that would be high decoupling. Low decoupling is people that you know, that he hit his wife and therefore I'll never watch one of his films before again, ever again, sort of thing, would be low decoupling. Um, Generally, the rationalists like the high decoupling, though there's something to be said for the low decoupling as well. Um, Anyway, I'm sorry, that's a little bit of a rabbit
No,
trail
I
there.
love it. I love the rational sphere, and when I search that term, it comes up with Scott Alexander stuff on it, and that he's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
Slate Star Codex guy. I don't know if you
yes, yeah, yeah.
he to me, him, Paul Graham, and like maybe Gwern, they write these essays, and I'm just constantly like, how do they do it? This Scott Alexander specifically, he turns out these things, and I'm always amazed. Paul Graham turns out a lot of really amazing content, but he doesn't write as often. You know, he writes maybe like 6 to 12 essays a year, but everyone I'm like, damn, he's so smart. That might be a good segue. I am curious, like I asked just on Twitter, like how do you come up with good ideas to Paul? And he said something to the effect of he's like, I just notice things that are interesting. And some advice I've seen in my work life that's been very useful is just asking sort of like obvious dumb questions to people. So like I've worked on a lot of projects where I'm a project manager, and typically it's for tech, but sometimes it's for other things. And I'll typically work with people who are like specialists in the field. They'll be like entomologists focused on, you know, bugs and that sort of things, or AI specialists. And it'll be usually a group effort where there's like a lot of people, but every single person has like a different specialty. And I found if you just ask somebody like, what's something obvious? For them, they just assume what's obvious to everyone else is like everyone knows about like, you know, low level AI things, and really nobody knows. So I was curious, like, do you have advice that, like, obviously you're very like, you know, hundreds of hours teaching kids how to perfect the art of composition and that sort of thing. Do you have any thoughts on how to be a good writer, or like just generically, if you were like, I want to train up a student to be like the greatest writer or best, but just for fun, is there something that you would have?
There's a great book several years back by Stephen King called On Writing,
Mm,
and he writes about his writing process. And his two pieces of advice were write a lot, read a lot.
that is good.
Says there's no other shortcuts. Write a lot, read a lot. If you're not writing a lot, if you're not reading a lot, you're probably not going to be a writer rather. So if you're not able to do those two things, you're probably kind of fooling yourself about what your potential is as
Mm,
a writer. That you've got almost a compulsive hunger to write and write and write and figure things out and just put in the hours there. Um,
that's yeah, that seems like good advice.
and the other thing for a good writer, someone who went to be a good writer, is just lots of feedback.
Mm,
Um, One of the things I learned when I first started doing composition is I'd have students write a draft, they'd submit it, I'd, give them a B, A, C or something. and they might read the comments, they might not. But I didn't really see much improvement. So what I started doing a few years back is requiring students to have conferences with me all semester for rough drafts. And it takes so much time. It's so tedious. Students like it because I have to block out several classes to do this.
Mm.
Um, but they come to me with a rough draft and I read it. We have a conversation. What do you mean by this? And what's the direction here? And it sure seems to me like your introduction is puffed up with nothing but empty words. Can you
Mm.
say this in a tighter way? Can you say this in a shorter way? And there I see improvement because we get feedback, right? Or they're confused on something of what I'm asking for. We talk about it. Uh, it does sometimes lead to testy moments. You know, people get a little defensive about their writing,
Definitely.
uh, especially if you say this is totally wrong, and you have to learn how to say that very delicately sometimes. Um, but just learning that people get better when they have interactive feedback on
Yeah.
it. It's not just here's the final product A, here's the final product C, that there's some kind of conversation happens there.
That seems like really good advice, and that's it's something that I hear often because yeah, I'll talk to people who I like as writers, and I'll be like, "What advice do you have?" And often it's get an editor or have somebody looking at your stuff, and that's definitely it's kind of the hard bit, hard one to just find somebody who's willing to do it, but it is hard to also just go through and also just sort of find your voice. Like I know some people they'll have an editor, and it's not like you take their advice all the time, but maybe at the beginning you're really trying to like become a better writer, and then as you get more developed and mature as a writer you start going, actually I wanted it this way because of XYZ, or it leads into something later. um yeah, nice. I like this guy Tim Ferriss. He's like a productivity dude, and he was talking about he had a uh I think he went, I think it was like Stanford or Harvard or something, but he had John McPhee, who's like this great non-fiction writer, as a teacher, and he would go through with all the students, and he'd have so much like red ink that it was more red ink than the actual writing they had, and he would just drill them with feedback. But it was, it was very much like these are really good writers, but just he's trying to get the absolute best out of them. And I think there was one exercise he would do with them where he would go through favorite like paragraphs that he's read through his just career of being a writer, and he'd be like, I want you to remove as much of this as you can and still keep the structure. And I think there was one from The Heart of Darkness from Joseph Conrad, and he would tell them, he's like, this is my favorite line in literature, so be careful, but I want you to try to remove as much as you can and still keep that sort of semblance of what's there. um yeah, nice. I was working with an editor at one point, and I sort of dropped off doing that. But yeah, I'm trying to get back into writing, and I think the feedback bit is it's a bit difficult to find people willing to do it. And yeah, that's good advice. I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy. It's kind of esoteric, but his name's Wild Bow, and he writes like online web serials. He's probably my favorite writer, and he writes these different things, but this one is called Worm, and it's like,
Oh, I've heard of that. Yeah,
yeah, it's like 4 times the size of all the Harry Potters or something like that. Like it's an insanely long book, but it's so good. And I really love reading his writing advice because he's a person who just he's getting through like every 50 weeks, like Lord of the Rings in just writing volume, which isn't to say his writing is like at that level. Um,
very
but
prolific. Yeah.
yeah, but he's definitely prolific, and a lot of people love his writing, like I myself. And he was talking about he had this teacher called Peter Elbow, who's uh, like a applied linguistics teacher or something, and he would talk about specifically, I think it's like the cadence of how you write. So instead of just obsessing over editing and getting the thing right down correctly, he really focuses on what he calls like free writing, which is just that sort of like stream of consciousness. Get as much words on the paper as you can, and just sort of build that flow first, and then later you can edit and get that out. But I think a lot of newbie writers specifically, they just get stuck in their head at the beginning, and they're like, don't start. And yeah, I think that's probably good advice, especially if you're just trying to get the bulk out. Maybe not the best long term. Um, hmm. Have you read George Orwell's politics in the English language essay he wrote.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that was a piece to me that like it really, yeah, I read it every so often and I'm like, wow, this is really good writing. I'm very surprised. Do you have anything like that? Like obviously you said On Writing by Stephen King. Um, is there anything else that you've read that you could sort of like point to that's like, oh, this would probably help a new writer or an experienced writer or whoever? I think with Stephen King, with a lot of these writers, it's interesting to me that they're very different. So there's like some people call it like an architect or like a gardener, where like a gardener just like writes and then like ideas sprout, and that's Stephen King. He just writes, he doesn't know how the ending's going to end. And then you have like George Martin, other people who are they plan everything out in a lot of detail and then they write it out. Um, I like seeing that contrast because it seems like every writer's got their own process and what works for one person doesn't work for another. But yeah, I don't know if you have thoughts on that or any other ideas.
Um, I'm trying to remember who was it said this, but and if someone probably Google this pretty easily, but there was a guy who's talking to one of the challenges for early writers is you read your first stuff and you get discouraged because it's not good.
Hmm.
And you know it's not good. And a lot of people stop writing at that point because they have a good taste, they know good authors, they know what they like, and they read what they've written and they see that gap. And it's very discouraging. But what you need to do is work your way through that, right? You
Mhm.
have to get better so that you can write something that meets the standards that you have in your own head. But that first draft is not going to be good.
Yeah.
That the first few stories you write, the first essays you write, they're going to be disappointing and it's going to be discouraging because you know what's good and what you wrote isn't.
Mm.
So just being aware of that and being able to work through that and getting past that and keep writing, keep improving, because you will be able to match that level of your taste uh, eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good advice. I know Brandon Sanderson's like a fairly famous fiction fantasy writer and I think he wrote like 7 books before the first one got published. So he just kept smashing them out. And then yeah, and I think that's
He's
better.
also a prolific guy.
He's a what? Prolific?
He's very prolific as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, I didn't actually read any of his stuff before I found him. I just saw that he's on this writing podcast called Writing Excuses, but he also does like lectures on how to be a writer. And I was like, oh wow, he's really good. And then I read his stuff and I was a little surprised that it wasn't what I like. I thought his writing advice was so good that I actually thought it was like a bit better than his writing. But now that I've like gone through a bit more of his writing, sometimes I think back and I'm like, wow, it was actually a really good like ambiance and like I miss sort of reading some of his stories that I initially started with. I know Neil Gaiman is another guy who I did this like writing course thing that he had, and he was talking about, some writers say like you're gonna have a shit writing for the first 2 million words or whatever. So the idea is just to get those words out, and obviously that's not like a scientific thing, but he was just saying like the idea is just to keep writing until something good comes out. And I think for me, being the person who's like very talkative, that seemed like really good advice. I remember Isaac Asimov is like a science fiction writer who I really liked. And I heard somebody say who was like friends with him that he would basically he would treat it not like a job, but he would write from like 9 in the morning until 11 at night. And he basically just said to himself, like, I'm gonna keep typing. I don't really care what comes out, but I'm not gonna stop typing for 9 hours or whatever. And he's like, then my brain would just be like, well, if I'm gonna be writing, I might as well write something good and would just keep going. And I tried that like when I heard that advice and I was like, damn, like I wrote for 6 hours and it wasn't very good, but I was like, wow, I can really just like turn off that self-censoring thing and just get the words out. And for me, he's a very interesting person because he would write a lot back in the day with typewriters too, and he would just keep writing and writing, but he would switch from subject to subject. So he'd be having like 8 different projects going at the same time. And if he got stuck on one thing, he just immediately switched to something else, but he wouldn't stop. And I thought for me, that's pretty amazing because, it's flies in the face of most advice you get. Like a lot of people, like, just stick to that first book and make sure that you get it out. Whereas he's, wrote, I think, close to more books than any other person, except for like,
Yeah, he was a prolific guy. Yeah.
yeah, I always find it interesting that L. Ron Hubbard, the famous Scientology inventor,
Mhm.
like he's touted as being the person who's wrote the most books. But I always found it interesting that he doesn't seem to be a good writer from what I've gathered. Like I I think Stephen King said he really liked one of his books, but I've never heard anyone else talk about any of his books in like a positive light that wasn't, John Travolta or Tom Cruise or whatever. So yeah, I found that interesting. Like I guess it is
It's been a
possible.
long time since I've read it, but what I remember is that they're very compelling. Like you want to keep reading to the next page to find out what happens next, what happens next. But when you finish with the book, it didn't really seem like, oh, there really wasn't much there. But
Mm,
I think his secret was he knew how to keep you turning the page.
yeah.
Um, but to be honest, it's been decades since I think I've read any L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah, I think he's a person who could have benefited with an editor or somebody, just like, hey, maybe we should update this book a little bit. But I don't want to be too critical. I don't want to get put on a list
Sure.
or anything like that. You also said you like Ted Ch Chang, and probably pronouncing that.
Yeah, I read all of his short stories. There's only I think 19 of them, 18 or 19 of them.
Okay. I haven't
So
read them
so
all.
those who don't know, he's a science fiction writer. Um, his parents were Chinese immigrants, and he actually lives in Seattle or something like that.
Mm.
And so I am part of a faculty reading group, and I suggested we read
Oh,
Ted
nice.
Chiang this semester. Um, so I'm the main facilitator for the reading circle this semester. So I had to actually do all the reading first, so we could sign out the story. So yeah, I like Ted Chiang. He might be the best contemporary science fiction writer. I think there's some competition there, particularly for short fiction. I'd probably say it might be Ted Chiang. Um, very much I'll try to explain that he likes to it's as if you are writing with the software, but his stories are about rewriting the software program itself.
That's a great.
Like, what if the whole world, our whole understanding of the world has been changed and the
Mm.
rules work differently in the world? What if it's a world where you have golems and Kabbalah and the languages speak differently? What if there's a place where we prove free will doesn't exist or that
Mm.
mathematics is not perfectly objective? In other words, what if we actually changed the software of the world and not just have an event happen like laser guns, or bring dead people back to life, or whatever it is for the typical science fiction story. So it's interesting because he is this kind of more of a meta thinking person. But my one criticism would be is that I think often I don't really like the way the stories end. I like the worlds he creates. I like the new what science fiction writers call the novum, what's different about the world than it from our world, what makes it science fiction, in other words. But then at the end of the story, I'm like, man, I, I wish he had a better ending. The stories that I think stand out, I wrote a list here: Tower of Babylon, Story of Your Life, the one that Arrival is based on, and Hell is the Absence of God. I think are three that are his three most stellar stories.
So
They
what did you
do
say?
all
What did you say? Story of your life, and that's based on. Is that what you said? Something based.
the movie Arrival that with Amy
Oh,
Adams that came
oh,
out
right.
years ago.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, I've seen.
based on Story of Your Life.
Yeah.
And those are probably his three most famous, and justly so, uh, that they are really quality stories. But
Yeah, I'm
yeah, I
like,
like Ted Chiang. I don't think he always sticks the landing, but I think he is definitely one of the best sci-fi writers that we have.
no, I wonder. I haven't actually read that much. I've read Exhalation, or
Yeah.
half. No, I'm only halfway through. I haven't even finished it, and I've read Hell is the Absence of God, but I haven't read the other. But I've heard a bit about. I'm pretty sure it was him where he did this one where it's like you can look inside the multiverse and see these worlds that have like they're almost
Yeah,
your world, but you got the promotion 10 years ago and you're slightly happier or whatever it might be. And I love that aspect. Like, yeah, blend what you said was such a good way. You said that most people are like most writing's like software, but he's like updating the software or something like that. That was great.
yeah.
I think it might be as well though that if he's delving into such philosophical topics and sort of stretching your mind, it could be that, and I haven't finished enough of his to say it, but it could be that it's just really hard to deliver when you've gone so meta.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's true, but
I was looking at my notes. Anxiety is a dizziness of freedom is that story that you're mentioning there
oh,
about the
okay.
different realities. And that's a good one too. I'm not quite sure I like the ending as I said before, but yeah, that's really fast. There's a device that you can make a decision and then press a button, and you in one parallel world you made the decision, you one parallel you did not, and you can
Mhm.
consult, you can talk to that person who made the decision and see their life. And sometimes it's really bad because you made the wrong decision and their life is now great. I should have taken that job, or I should have married that girl. Uh, and then that kind of that bitterness eats at you because you realize you made a mistake. Whereas you always otherwise have said, well, what if, what if, what if? So yeah, that's one of the best ones.
That's so meta because it's kind of just like that's what so many people do anyway with their life. They ruminate over very small things and they're like, "Oh my God, my life could have been so different." Yeah, that's interesting. I used to listen to this podcast a lot called Very Bad Wizards, and it's sort of like an ethical philosophy podcast with comedy. Just these two like professors, one's a psychologist and one's a philosophy person, but they would talk about things like that, and they really went like a 2 hour podcast about that specific episode. And I love that sort of thing. Something where it's like there's a philosophical weirdness to it. I love it. Like I liked Black Mirror, even though some of the episodes are differing levels of quality and it can be very hard to write that sort of thing. Do you like the free body problem guy or I did
I actually read the first book of the series.
I personally didn't
And is it Lou? I think his name is Lou, right?
Lou
Li.
Cixin. I really should my girlfriend's Chinese. I should pronounce it. I'm really bad with the Chinese pronunciation.
Part
Lou's
of my struggle was that I think it tried to be a very faithful translation from the Chinese, but it made it kind of stilted. It was a little hard to read because it was a kind of a stilted language to it.
yeah, okay.
But it's really a good story, just a story. There's a character you meet that you think is a hero. It turns out to be a villain. And there's a character you meet that's a villain. You think is a villain, but turns out to be a hero. And it's so well done that at the end, you're really kind of shocked. I mean, I should have said that because then it's a bit of a spoiler. But I was reading like, are the rest of the books as good as the first one? The general consensus seemed to be no. And so I read summaries online and I
Yeah.
kind of left it at that. I don't know if I'm going to go back to read the next two books, the trilogy. But there is again a Netflix or somebody adapting the novels. In fact, I think the Game of Thrones guys are adapting the novels um, for one of the streamers. So
Yeah,
I look forward to that.
there's already one that's out. That's a Chinese one, and then there's a Netflix English one coming out. And for me, that seems kind of interesting because what I only read the first one as well, and I was actually surprisingly a little bit disappointed. But maybe that was just because people told me it's like the greatest thing since sliced
Yeah.
bread. I really liked it, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe I seek out those sorts of sci-fi, so I had already seen some of the plot holes. But it'd be interesting to me to see the distinction between the English and the Chinese because I know there were some aspects of it that were like pretty negatively looking at like communism almost or like science and communism and them not accepting it. So I'd be curious to see if the Chinese one is like just takes that out and tries to paint it in a different light or what. One more question I had, just curious. Did you watch the Rings of Power show by any chance? It's
I did not.
even
I've
though you
heard
probably
enough
need to,
things that
it's pretty bad.
kind of soured me on it that I didn't bother with it.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's fair. For me, I was like, oh, cool, like $1 billion story in the Lord of the Rings world. But yeah, it was very disappointing. It's a bit sad how disappointing it was. No, I was just going to ask if you had thoughts. I was talking to one person and he said that he felt like the issue was that they tried to bring like moral determinism in a sort of like black and white world where, like Game of the Thrones is all about politics and political manipulation, whereas Lord of the Rings is more just right and wrong. Here's, evil, kind of like Star Wars, like the evil side, and here's the good side, and it's like a triumph over evil. Whereas this other one was trying to I think they had at the end they had like Sauron as like a person, but they didn't like explain it, and so he's like a person, so you can sort of relate with him. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how much time you have. I think we've been for like an hour, but I'm happy to go longer or not. I'm mindful I didn't really give you a time, so I don't want to like
Sure.
take more of your time than what you have or anything.
Well, I probably need to get home before too long, but I got some time. Um, was there,
Yeah, I
if
mean,
we had something
I'd
to
love to
talk
ask
about.
maybe a little bit more about some of the schooling and literature stuff, if that's okay. I'm super excited about that stuff. I think for me as a person who really squandered my schooling time, and I probably could have done more of an effort, and this is not a good look, but I remember telling my dad like, "Hey, I'm not doing this assignment," and he's a teacher. He shouldn't have done this. He's like, "I'll do it for you," and I'm like, "All right, cool." And so it's definitely not great. But yeah, I'm curious. Like, I'm a bit of an idiot. Like, self-acknowledgingly, I feel that I am, or maybe not an idiot, but there's definitely like huge gaps in my knowledge base where like there's so many things about even just like basic English that I'm like so bad at. Like, I'm really bad at like distinguishing between like adjectives and verbs and all that, or not distinguishing between them, but like I don't think of them when I'm writing. I just write. And I've done a lot of
Sure.
jobs where I've had to have like editors read my stuff for various different things like business grants and stuff like that. And I'd say I'm a decent writer, but yeah, there's these huge chunks in my knowledge base where I'm like, I definitely feel like I should uh touch up on that sort of stuff. And I've gone through some things like elements of style and that sort of stuff, which seem a little bit more like geared towards like that, like going through basic grammar and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I was curious, do you have like if you met someone, let's say hypothetically 30 years old, like I am, and then let's just imagine they didn't do schooling. Is there sort of like a crash course of things that, sorry, my cat's knocking stuff over, a sort of crash course of things you would find most useful, like the sort of 80/20 of like, okay, you're in the world, you're dealing with stuff, but you haven't got, let's say an English background or whatnot. I don't know if that's a poorly
Um,
question.
well, you mentioned that style guide. Which one was it that you used?
Elements
The
of
strong
uh
elements of,
sorry. I think it's the elements of structure.
uh,
No.
yeah. There's a couple out there. I think Strunk and White is a famous one. And those are good places to start from.
What was it
Um, uh,
called? Sorry? Struck.
sorry,
What was the name of
Strunk,
it?
Strunk,
Oh,
and White, White.
right.
Uh,
The elements of
remember
style. Yeah, that's the one.
that?
Really stunk. Yeah, I've read that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Those aren't bad places to start. Um, it's funny that I think Twitter is a pretty good place to get feedback in on writing and getting a voice. Um,
I haven't heard that before.
because it's so instantaneous and it's in some ways it doesn't really bruise the ego that much, at least for me. If I
Yeah.
post something and it fails or it flops, oh well, just bat another thing, set up the cage and hit another swing again and try something else and figuring out what kind of works for your voice because you get that instant feedback. I mean, I
Hmm.
don't know how well you get a great novel out of it, but it certainly helps you kind of develop a voice just because you're in that arena, right? You're in the arena and people are assessing you, people are listening to you, and you get a chance to kind of just chip some shots and see what works and see what doesn't. Um, I remember started out my Twitter account, the Thinkwert account. It was 2020 that I really started using it to write. And it took me a while of experimenting different things. I went through a phase where I tried to use a lot of emoticons and emojis and create things out of them, and that didn't work. People didn't care, and try to talk about literature. I talked about William Blake a lot. I wrote my PhD dissertation partly on William Blake, and so the
Okay.
poet, I really like William Blake, and that
Yeah.
did okay. Didn't catch on, and then I started kind of using images, usually children's illustrations or science fiction and fanciful images, and adding captions and kind of playing off of those, and that tended to be where I found success and kind of play with that formula, and that's my voice on Twitter. It's just kind of that experimentation over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think you seem more methodical about your approach to Twitter than most people I've
Yeah.
seen. You've got like you've really thought about like how to how to structure a tweet or whatever, and then if it kind of flops, I don't know if you want me to say this or not, but if it flops, you kind of
No, no, yeah.
um
I'll delete a tweet if it pretty quickly if I know that doesn't make a trajectory. I'll repost it usually on deleted word. Uh, but because I write so many tweets, I just have a quiver full of tweets sitting there. Why let this one suck up the attention? Just delete it, post another one, and move on. Although I've kind of slacked, I don't know if you noticed, the last couple months, I'm not posting nearly as much, taking kind of semi break where I'm writing maybe 15 tweets a week rather than 150 like I usually do or you had been doing. But yeah, I'm not posting quite as much as I was.
yeah, I go through cycles where sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm in it, I feel like I'm doing so good, and then like 3 days go by and I'm like it's probably a good thing in my life. I'm like, oh, I'm not even really checking Twitter. I'm dealing with my life or whatever, and it's probably a good thing. But yeah, I don't know if it's like it's not like FOMO, but sometimes I feel like I'm really not engaging with it as I should be because when you're in sort of the groove and you're really posting a lot, it does feel good and you have like a lot of people in your accounts growing. But yeah, I've noticed that I'm I need to put more effort into it. And so you say you have like a quiver full of things. I used to have I did a lot of journaling. Like that was my main thing where I would just write and I'm just trying to whatever it is, like a project or a book or whatever. But I would always do like daily, just try to get words out for whatever reason. Like I love talking, I love not shutting the fuck up, and my girlfriend loves for me to shut up and stop talking to her. So I would do a lot of writing. I would always have like a topic that or like a file that was called like concepts I'd like to explore or things I find interesting, stuff like that. And there I would post a lot of things, and it could just be like something I want to look up, or this is an interesting dichotomy that I noticed. Is that sort of how you approach it, or do you just like you're teaching, you're bored, and you're like, oh, what about
Yeah,
giant?
my process for Twitter is I will basically go to different sites and collect a bunch of images. I probably go through thousands of images in a week, and then I'll save maybe a couple hundred a week, and then I'll take some and just write a caption. I know that most of them are not gonna I'm not gonna post because they're not very good, but I'll get some ideas out there and post them, and then in a typical week when I'm at my really serious about it, I'm writing 100, 150 tweets a week and
Mm,
posting maybe half, uh, maybe not even half of them. And but I would try to post something, oh, 7 or 8 tweets on a weekday. So about 40 tweets posting a week. And just as you said earlier, methodical, real methodical about it and seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and just kind of posting.
interesting. Yeah, it seems like you probably are coming up with way more ideas then because you said they're not all going to work or the images aren't all going to work. I think I am. I need to be more discretionary with it. I think I'm like hitting like 90% of the ideas I come up with, I like post, and maybe I should be like maybe just the top gems instead of wasting people's times with stupid ideas. Because yeah, I think for me, especially where I'm at, like kind of, I mean, I'm not really that new. I've been viewing tweets forever. I just haven't really posted that many. Um, I think I'm still trying to like figure out my voice and figure out what I want to write about. It's interesting to me that you have such a specific background. So like, you've you're an English teacher, you have all this, knowledge, but I don't see you like, have you ever thought about like doing that sort of stuff on Twitter, or is that weird? Like, here's basically
Um,
a lesson in a tweet about.
well, like I said, I was when I very first started out in 2020, I was posting about William Blake every day, talk about the poet William Blake, and I had a little fact that I was posting about him. As I get back into Shakespeare, I'm thinking about maybe starting to post more about Shakespeare. There's a lot of things that I've taken 3 courses in Shakespeare as a student,
Oh
but then
wow.
as I started teaching it, I was realizing there was things I was taught, or at least things I assumed were correct that were not correct about how he worked and the way the stage worked. And so I'm thinking about maybe posting a little bit more factual stuff on Shakespeare. One
Okay.
thing, for those of you familiar with my account, is I'm a fabulist. Like, I'll make up stuff a lot on
Mm,
Twitter. Like, I'll make up stuff all the time. I've gotten community noted a few times, but it's all in fun.
yeah,
But the problem is that when I post something serious, people think I'm making stuff up.
that is what
Right?
it is.
Is this a joke? Think we're just making a joke? Is this a riff on something? So I sometimes I'll have to reply back saying, no, I'm really serious about this. That's the problem with being a fabulist, is that people assume you're always lying and making stuff up. So that's part of my challenge, is that my brand is known for outrageous falsehoods. So it's
Yeah.
hard to be honest, or to be truthful and sincere uh, when you're constantly making stuff up and people know it about you.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot, not specifically with you, but like a lot of accounts where they are just more shit posting, which I wouldn't say that you are. Yours is more like, I don't know, it's almost like this mythological, like realism sort of thing. And for yours, like I can pretty much tell that they're all fake. But some people, they very verge the line of like what's real and what's not. And they're like, sometimes it seems like some people are trying to get community noted. And I almost, it's probably not a good thing, but I almost feel like being community noted is a good thing, because like I feel like it draws more traffic to your post. Like even if it's, you don't get the revenue or whatever it might be, like the mechanism of like trying to discourage people from doing it, it seems like it's kind of the opposite, because if you get community noted, it's like this big banner on the bottom and it just draws more eyes to it. So it seems, yeah,
Yeah.
almost like a good thing.
Are
Um,
you familiar with Growing Daniel
yeah,
on
he's
Twitter? Yeah.
specifically who I'm thinking about a lot.
Yeah.
But
I DM'd him a few weeks back, and I asked him, have you noticed that the community notes taking money from your pocket? And he says, no, no,
right,
not that he's noticed.
right.
And I think it might be what you were mentioning there, that he gets so much attention for the ones that do get community noted, that the ones that aren't bring in the revenue to kind of even it out for him, or even increase it. But yeah, he says it doesn't seem to be really hurting him.
Yeah, and I think there's maybe also like a sort of dichotomy thing with like, if you're a smaller account, it almost seems like if you're maybe controversial or trolling and stuff like that, like it's better at the beginning because you can just grow so quickly. Whereas like if you're very sincere and you're doing something like legitimate, it's just going to be like a slow grind. But like I don't know if you saw that meme with that girl who was like on a plane and she was like, that person is not real. And she like got,
Yeah, yeah.
like, I saw she joined Twitter and she, like instantly got like 40,000 followers or whatever, just from being, kind of famous. Which, yeah, don't know if it's the best strategy. Don't know if you want to have your face memed out there as like a thing that people make fun of, but I don't know.
Well, the one that speaking of kind of celebrities, I don't know if you've heard about this in Australia, but Gypsy Rose, do you know who that is?
Hmm.
So she's kind of notorious. Uh, she murdered her mom, basically. Um,
Shit, no.
30 years ago, there was kind of a proxy Munchausen thing where her mom was forcing her to pretend to be sick as a child in order to make money or to gain sympathy. And in
Jesus.
fact, her mother was making her take medicine that made all her teeth fall out. And basically, it was a horrible abuse situation. And when she got old enough, the daughter got a online boyfriend to murder her mother for her. And
Yeah.
so then Gypsy Rose ended up spending 7 years in jail for her role in it, and she got out. And she's now an Instagram and TikTok celebrity because people were so sympathetic to the abuse that she went through, that she was getting like 3 million views on TikTok for just posting some inane thing because people were super fascinated by this woman who murdered her mother and
Right.
spent years in jail for it.
That's
Gypsy
incredible.
Rose is her name? Gypsy
Gypsy
Rose
Rose,
something.
yeah, I just Googled it. Gypsy Rose,
Yeah, yeah.
Blanchard. Yeah, that's weird.
Uh,
It's almost a little terrifying, you know what I mean? Because like I don't know, like sometimes in America you see these videos of kids doing just horrific things for the TikTok views, and there was that trend. I don't know if it's still going around of just like knocking people out on the street where
yeah, yeah,
typically it'd be, yeah, sort of either Mexican black people just like going up to just like some old lady and just clocking it. And sometimes you see
yeah,
they'll have like an interview and they're like, oh, I didn't even like, I'm not even doing, I didn't steal their stuff. Like I'm not doing anything. Like they couldn't even conceptualize like you could potentially kill somebody. Like if their head hits the pavement, boom, you're dead. But yeah, it's pretty
There was
crazy.
a survey done of young people like under 18. What job would you like to have in the future? And
Yeah,
number one was like social media star,
yeah,
right? That's the job that our young people would most like to have
mm.
is to be the next Mr. Beast, right? Or whatever on there.
Yeah, I get a very Mr. Beast is a person who I get like a I forget what the phenomenon is when you see like a dead person and it like scares you. But yeah, sometimes his videos they just look like that creepy sort of I don't they just seem fake. Like it's like how like Donald Trump is like he's a person who is kind of a construction of some American generic tropes or whatever. It seems like Mr. Beast is sort of that. Like it's just like everything is just like a do you want to be a millionaire star? And it's all like live on this island and you'll get $1 million. And yeah, I mean the
Yeah,
worst
he
case is
seemed,
is like Kyle Rittenhouse level of like you do something horrible and now you're kind of famous for killing people. But
yeah, yeah. Mr. Beast seems to be hyper optimized. I mean,
yeah.
for the clicks, for the views. Uh, and I guess I'm a little bit hypocrite because I try to optimize as well with
Mhm.
my Twitter account. But boy, he has got that formula down. It's incredible, really,
It is.
how meticulous he is and what he's accomplished.
There's a I think we'll wrap up soon, but just quickly, there was there's this show and this book called The Peripheral by I think it's what's his name William Gibson, who did like the Neuromancer books and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And in The Peripheral there's this it's like they don't really like approach it, at least as far as I've read, like what happens, but like the civilization falls down and all that sort of stuff. But there's an aspect of it where it's like, I think it's like everyone starts voting on everything, and it becomes this sort of egregore, which is like a
Mhm.
entity that's created by the minds of everyone that like does stuff. And apparently it's just like that level of just like this craziness influences people are getting killed because just everyone's on the social media and just like, oh, kill him, and it just like goes crazy because it's like so quick and everyone's voting on everything. And you'll have like a Kanye West become president and like just like craziness like that. I don't want to be super hyperbolic because I don't think we're getting to that level, but sometimes that stuff does scare me because sometimes it feels like, yeah, people are just disassociating with reality and they're just looking at what they're looking on a screen. And you can see people
Yeah,
getting shot and you can kind of just like disassociate with actually what's happening. But anyway, yeah, but yeah, I think we had a good chat. If you're
yeah,
keen to head off, I think it's a good random place. We've
okay,
covered a lot, literature
yeah.
and school shooting and random stuff. But yeah, it was a great
It was
chat. I
great.
love chatting with
Yeah,
you. If anybody wants to read more of Thinkwert stuff, definitely would recommend his Twitter. He's probably got one of the most entertaining Twitter accounts that I've personally seen. And yeah, I love reading it and I hope
thank
you
you.
keep doing it.
All right, nice to see you, Levi.
It's good to talk to you. All right. I'll probably
Bye.
just